There is a chair in the center of the galaxy that no one dares to claim. Not because it is forbidden. Not because it is forgotten. But because of who it was meant for. A seat carved from the metals of dying stars. Placed at the heart of the Galactic Senate. Not beside the others but above them. It belongs to Earth. For over 1,000 years, empires have risen and crumbled. Species have waged wars, made peace, and reached for power. The Senate endured them all, dictating the laws of civilization from its great chamber of order. And through it all, Earth's seat remained untouched. No one speaks of it. No one dares to ask. Even the boldest leaders look away when their eyes drift too close. But now, for the first time in living memory, someone asks the question: why is Earth's seat still empty? What follows is not just a mystery unraveling. It's the unsealing of a truth buried by time, by fear, and by design. A forgotten signal. A restricted archive sealed by trembling hands. A fleet left in the dark, not abandoned but waiting. Because humanity never disappeared. They withdrew. Silently. Voluntarily. On their own terms. They saw something out there in the void. And what they saw made them leave. Made them build. Made them prepare. Now the storm is rising. The shadows at the edge of the galaxy are moving. And Earth, after centuries of silence, has chosen to answer. They are not returning to take their seat. They are returning to remind the galaxy why it was left empty in the first place. And what happens when humanity stops watching and starts to act? The chamber was vast, an impossible cathedral of light and shadow, where stars shimmered faintly through the transparent domed ceiling above. Endless rows of seats rose like waves in a cosmic amphitheater, each one marked with the sigils of empires, coalitions, and dynasties older than recorded time. And yet, in the very center of it all, beneath the ancient seal of the Galactic Senate, stood a single chair, untouched by dust, decay, or diplomacy. Earth's seat. Its frame was forged from obsidian harvested from dying stars. Its arms inlaid with golden veins that pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. A symbol of power. Of absence. Of warning. No one sat there. No one ever had. And yet, it was never removed. To the untrained eye, it was just a chair. But those who understood, those who remember, knew it was more than that. It was a scar carved into the center of civilization. A reminder of a species that had once sat among the stars, then vanished. Not with a war. Not with fanfare. But with silence. And somehow, that silence echoed louder than any weapon ever forged. KYX stood still beneath the cold light of the Senate's great chamber. His four-fingered hands rested against the polished obsidian desk, slick like oil under starlight. A sea of alien faces surrounded him, reptilian eyes, chitinous jaws, glowing tendrils, all watching, and yet pretending not to watch. The chamber, so grand moments before, now felt hollow like a mausoleum dressed in gold. He had trained his whole life for this. He'd memorized histories, treaties, even the ancient codes of war diplomacy. But one question lingered in his mind. A question every tutor warned him not to ask. And yet, the words slipped from his mouth like a forgotten truth. KYX, quiet, curious. Why is Earth's seat still empty? It was as if he'd spoken a curse. The chamber fell into a silence so deep, so sudden, it rang louder than thunder. The lights flickered. A subtle hum from the ventilation died out as if the building itself had paused to listen. Some senators froze. Others looked away. A few older ones closed their eyes like they'd just heard a ghost speak. A slow creak echoed from the upper dais as Chancellor Ovaltar rose tall, scaled, eyes like molten stone. His voice, when it came, was controlled. Too controlled. Chancellor Ovaltar, measured, low. Earth refused to participate. They chose to walk away. But there was something beneath his tone. A weight. A shadow. From the far corner of the chamber, an elder stood, his withered body wrapped in ceremonial robes of the far. His eyes, though long blind, seemed to pierce through veils of time. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. Elder Far, whispers, trembling. Because they don't need to. And that is what terrifies us. In that moment, KYX realized something chilling. The greatest fear in this room was not war, not extinction, but the silence of a power so vast, it didn't even care to rule. Before KYX could ask more, before the elder could speak again, or the shadows in the chamber could settle, a shrill, mechanical alarm sliced through the silence like a blade through silk. A holographic display jolted to life at the center of the chamber. Lights flickered. The ornate calm of the Senate was gone, replaced by tension, confusion, and fear. Officer, loud, urgent. Emergency transmission. Origin, Outer Rim Sector. Unregistered signal, not from any known transponder. All movement ceased. Senators who moments before had refused to speak of Earth now leaned forward in unison, their eyes fixed on the screen, unblinking, breath held. The feed was unstable. The video shook violently, as if recorded during a quake. Static burst across the screen like digital lightning. And then, a figure emerged from the chaos. Half-lit, covered in frost, dust, and panic. Eyes wide with something beyond fear, beyond madness. Unknown voice, distorted, panicked. We found it. We found the truth. The Senate must know. The voice was swallowed by static. Gone. Cut off mid-sentence, as if something had reached through the stars and silenced them. The chamber was frozen. Even the automated systems seemed to hesitate, like the machines themselves knew what had just happened and wished they hadn't heard it. Officer, barely audible. The transmission originated from Outpost Theta 7. A human research station, presumed abandoned for over 4 centuries. The words hung heavy in the air. Theta 7. A name not spoken in generations. It had been listed as decommissioned, scrubbed from navigational charts, flagged as a radiation hazard. A graveyard in orbit around a dying star. Except, something had just spoken from inside it. And in their voice was not just desperation, but revelation. KYX felt his pulse rise. His fingertips tingled. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a distress call from scavengers or smugglers. It was a warning. A message dragged from the edge of the abyss. And whatever they had found, whatever truth they died trying to share, It had something to do with Earth. He looked around, but none of the senators spoke. Not a question. Not a word. Just silence. A silence filled with denial, with fear, and something worse. Recognition. Because some of them already knew. Haunted by the transmission and the silence that followed it. KYX couldn't sleep. Couldn't think. The image of that terrified voice cut off mid-sentence played on a loop in his mind. And behind it, always, loomed the cold, empty chair. Earth's chair. Some truths, he realized, are buried. Not because they are forgotten, but because someone is hiding them. So that night, beneath the artificial dusk of the Senate Citadel, KYX did the unthinkable. He went below. Past the public records. Past the diplomatic archives. Deeper, into the restricted sectors, where only high command and shadows were allowed to go. A corridor of silence. Steel walls whispered with long dormant machines. Security drones lay dormant like sleeping insects until KYX's forged credentials blinked them green. He stood before the final door. A massive vault of black alloy. Smooth. Cold. Waiting. The place where the Senate buried its past. KYX pulled out a small device foreign-made, illegal, beautiful in its precision. A whisper of code. A flicker of light. And the lock clicked open. Inside was silence. And truth. Rows of glowing terminals stretched before him, like gravestones marking every lie ever told. He typed one word. Earth. The system hesitated. Almost as if it didn't want to respond. Then files appeared. Most were sealed. Many were deleted. Some had been purged so violently the system refused to acknowledge they'd ever existed. But one file remained. Old. Dusty in dated terms. Marked with a red warning. Final Senate report, Earth withdrawal. Access level, extinct. KYX opened it. The screen crackled to life. A man appeared. Human. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Worn. His uniform was military black with silver trim, decorated with a rank that hadn't existed in over 9 centuries. His face was calm. His eyes were not. Admiral Daniel Graves. Calm, heavy voice. This is Admiral Graves of the Terran Defense Fleet. Earth is withdrawing from the Galactic Senate. Effective immediately. The Admiral stood in front of what looked like a command deck. Lights behind him flickered. His voice never shook. But something inside it cracked. Admiral Graves. This is not a retreat. We do not fear you. We do not fear anything in this galaxy. KYX leaned closer. His eyes wide. His breath shallow. Admiral Graves. But we have seen what lies beyond. Beyond what? What had they seen? Admiral Graves. We have seen the void stir. We have seen the watchers in the dark. The ones even you dare not name. The room around KYX felt colder. As if the Admiral's words weren't just being spoken, but remembered by the very air. Admiral Graves. The Senate is blind. You believe your fleets protect you. You think laws can hold back the dark. You are wrong. There was a pause. Then, one final sentence. Admiral Graves. We are leaving, to prepare. And when the day comes, when the void awakens again, we will be ready. And then, Admiral Graves, pray, we never return. The file collapsed into static. The screen went dark. Gone. Erased. Not archived. Not stored. Erased. As if someone knew that even watching this message was dangerous. KYX stood in the dark, trembling. Not from fear, but from understanding. He hadn't uncovered a secret. He had uncovered a warning. And if what Admiral Graves said was true, humanity hadn't disappeared. They had vanished on purpose. Because something was coming. And Earth was getting ready. The screen had just gone black. KYX barely had time to breathe. Then the door hissed open. Voices shouted. Heavy boots slammed against the floor. Guards. Armed. And not here to talk. KYX spun around, hard hammering. The Chancellor himself stood in the doorway, flanked by armored soldiers. His reptilian eyes gleamed with cold fury. Chancellor Ovaltar. You shouldn't have seen that. KYX raised his hands, backing away from the console. I didn't mean to, I was just... Chancellor Ovaltar. And that is exactly why you should have stayed ignorant. The guards moved in, stun weapons drawn. KYX's mind raced. Think. He lunged for the console, slamming his hacking device into the port. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. The entire archive shook as emergency lockdown systems kicked in. For half a second, everything glitched. And that was enough. KYX ran. Through the corridors. Past startled aides and confused droids. Ducking under bulkheads, sliding through sensor doors just before they sealed. Behind him blaster fire. Ahead only one thought, the docking bay. Get off world. He sprinted, lungs burning, footsteps echoing like thunder through the metal halls. The bay came into view. But so did a blast of blue light. The stun shot hit him square in the back. KYX collapsed, vision swimming, muscles locking. His head struck the cold floor. Before the darkness swallowed him, he saw one last thing. The Chancellor's smile. Cold. Satisfied. Inevitable. KYX woke to the hum of a ship. His body ached. His wrists were bound. Metal walls surrounded him. Dim lights. Low gravity. Not a prison cell, but not freedom either. A voice spoke, calm and familiar. Varn. You're lucky I convinced the Chancellor not to kill you. KYX turned his head. Senator Varn stood near the cockpit, no longer dressed in ceremonial robes. His expression was tired, but focused. KYX. Where are we? Varn. Far from the Senate. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere you can't cause more trouble. KYX clenched his jaw. You saw it. The video. Graves. Earth didn't just leave. They are preparing for something. Varn. I saw it. He stepped closer. Varn. And that's exactly why I'm doing this. KYX blinked. Confused. What do you mean? Varn didn't answer right away. He turned to the ship's console, entered a code, and brought up a holographic star map. The outer rim. A red beacon pulsed in the dark. KYX. The distress signal. Varn. The Chancellor wants it erased. He's sending a fleet to destroy the station. To make sure no one ever finds what's there. KYX stared at the blinking light. A forgotten outpost. A buried truth. KYX. Then we have to get there first. Varn let out a breath, then nodded. He reached forward and unlocked KYX's restraints. Varn. We leave now. But if we find what I think we will, we may not come back. The ship adjusted course. The stars stretched. And in a flash of light, they jumped into hyperspace. Toward the unknown. The stars blurred into lines as the ship tore through hyperspace. KYX sat in silence, eyes fixed on the blinking signal that pulsed on the display like a heartbeat from the past. No words. No noise. Just the low hum of the engines and the weight of everything they'd seen. Beside him, Varn adjusted the ship's course, his face set, unreadable. KYX. What do you think we'll find there? Varn didn't answer right away. He stared at the signal. Not with curiosity, but with something closer to dread. Varn. The last time anyone spoke of Earth's fleet, they called it unmatched. Some say they left behind something dangerous. Others say, they took something with them. KYX swallowed hard. And you think the Senate knows? Varn. The Senate fears Earth more than any enemy we've ever faced. KYX turned to him, confused. But why would they just let them go? Varn looked over, his voice low. Varn. We didn't let them go, KYX. They walked away. And no one dared stop them. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. The ship's alarm chimed. Destination reached. Outside the viewport, the station came into view. An ancient relic drifting through the dark like a dead god's tomb. It was massive. Scarred. Dust-covered. Yet somehow, still intact. Cracks ran along its surface, but faint lights blinked deep within. It was asleep, but not lifeless. KYX. Something's waiting for us. Landing thrusters fired, kicking up clouds of ancient dust as they entered a docking bay lined with frost and silence. The airlock opened with a groan. Cold air spilled in, laced with the scent of rust, oil, and time. They stepped inside. Blasters drawn. Footsteps echoing against metal floors that hadn't felt life in centuries. But the lights were on. Not fully. Just flickers. Enough to say one thing. This place wasn't abandoned. They moved through corridors lined with decay and silence. Then a sound of metallic click from deeper within. KYX. We're not alone. Varn pointed to a control panel ahead. Let's check the logs. They entered the command center. Dust-covered consoles hummed faintly. Screens flickered running on backup power, like ghosts refusing to fade. KYX activated the last surviving log. The screen jumped to life. A human scientist appeared, face pale, eyes wide, voice shaking. Dr. Ilis Carter, recording. We activated the last archive. They told us never to open it. They warned us. But we didn't listen. Static buzzed. The cameras shook. Dr. Carter. They never left. They've been watching. Waiting. And now. His voice broke. His eyes filled with something primal. Dr. Carter. Humanity is coming home. The feed cut out. Darkness returned. But something had changed. In the walls. In the air. In the hum beneath our feet. The station had heard the call. And now, it was beginning to wake up. The walls trembled. Somewhere deep beneath our feet, ancient machinery stirred for the first time in centuries. Lights surged across the station, cascading in waves, one system igniting another in perfect sequence, like dominoes of power snapping back to life. Consoles lit up. Doors unlocked. Engines whispered from chambers long sealed. What had been a tomb was now waking up. Metal groaned, deep and echoing, like the breath of something enormous just opening its eyes. Warning lights pulsed red. Display panels scrolled with forgotten human code, jagged lines of military systems reconnecting to a network that had never truly shut down. The station wasn't just waking. It was remembering. KYX, gasping. This is the Terran Defense Armada. He stepped to the viewport, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. Beyond the cracked station walls, movement. Massive shadows shifted in the void. Ships. Dozens. Hundreds. Dark silhouettes emerging from the wreckage and debris fields surrounding the station like a graveyard. But they weren't wrecks. Not anymore. Engines flared. Reactor cores blinked to life like sleeping stars. Weapon arrays extended from armored hulls that hadn't seen light in 1,000 years. They weren't just ships. They were relics of power. Dreadnoughts the size of cities. Carrier-class war machines bristling with turrets. Sleek strike vessels with hulls etched in Terran symbols. Each one bearing the mark of Earth. Each one awakening with a single purpose, readiness. KYX watched as the fleet aligned itself in orbit. Perfect formation, as if no time had passed. Varn, whispers. The Senate never let Earth leave. They were too afraid to stop them. The station rumbled again. Not in protest, but in confirmation. Screens across the command room blinked in sequence. Fleet status, online. Primary command link, reactivated. Awaiting orders. And in that moment, both KYX and Varn understood. Earth hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had built a weapon, hidden it in the dark, and then disappeared. Not in fear. Not in defeat. But because they were preparing for something no one else saw coming. And now, the storm was close. The command center lights dimmed again. Screens across the room froze, then blinked red. A mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Final protocol initiated. Authorization code accepted. Stand by for command interface. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Then on the central screen a new transmission appeared. A figure sat in a dark command chair, surrounded by glowing tactical displays. He wore a Terran uniform black as void, trimmed in silver. His face was hidden behind a reflective helmet. But his voice cut through the silence like a blade. Admiral Victor Hale. I am Admiral Hale of the Terran Defense Armada. You've trespassed on a classified military installation. KYX took a step forward, stunned. The Senate thought Earth abandoned the galaxy? There was a pause. Then the Admiral leaned slightly forward. Admiral Hale. That's what we wanted them to believe. The lights in the room shifted, cool blue fading into deep red. Outside, the fleet was moving into formation. Weapons deployed. Engines at full capacity. The Armada was no longer waking up. It was preparing. KYX stared at the man on the screen. Why? Why hide all this? The Admiral's tone sharpened. Admiral Hale. Because we saw what was coming. And we knew the Senate would never be ready. He gestured. A massive star map appeared behind him. An enormous fleet, unknown to any records, was moving across the edge of the galaxy. Dark ships. Thousands of them. Formed in perfect silence. Admiral Hale. We call them the Harbingers. Varn stepped forward, eyes locked on the map. There was no warning. No intelligence. Nothing from the outer rim. Hale didn't flinch. Admiral Hale. Because they weren't invading. Not yet. They were watching just like us. The room fell into a heavy silence. Admiral Hale. When Earth withdrew, we didn't abandon the galaxy. We sacrificed our presence to buy time. Time to build this. Time to prepare. KYX clenched his fists. And now. The Admiral's voice dropped lower. Admiral Hale. Now, time is up. On the main display, alerts began to flare. Harbinger fleet, detected. Engagement range, closing. The void outside rippled. Dark silhouettes emerged from hyperspace, sleek, jagged ships with glowing red cores. The Admiral didn't turn. He simply issued the order. Admiral Hale. It's time to remind the galaxy why Earth was feared. The Terran fleet moved. Shields activated. Weapons locked on. Engines roared to full burn. The war had begun. A low pulse echoed through the command deck. The central screen darkened, then exploded into light. A holographic map of the galaxy stretched out before them, detailed in brilliant blue and red lines. And then, they saw it. From the edge of the galactic rim, a colossal armada surged forward. Thousands of ships. Tight formations. No broadcast signatures. No diplomatic codes. Just movement. Purposeful. Relentless. Not human. Not known. And not stopping. Admiral Hale turned toward the display, his voice calm but edged with steel. Admiral Hale. We call them the Harbingers. He pointed to the crimson wave of ships spreading across the sector. Admiral Hale. They are the reason we left. And they're already here. KYX felt his throat tighten. The scale of the enemy force was unimaginable. These weren't raiders or rebels. They were organized, engineered for conquest. Varn, stunned. The Senate never saw this coming. Hale didn't look at him. Admiral Hale. Because they were too busy with politics. Arguing over trade routes. Worrying about votes and image. He turned, eyes locked on KYX and Varn. Admiral Hale. While they bickered, we built. In silence. In exile. The greatest war machine in history. On the display, the Terran Armada shifted into full deployment. Dreadnoughts took point. Carriers launched waves of unmanned fighters. Interceptor wings formed like a curtain of steel across space. Admiral Hale. We didn't hide because we were afraid. We hid, so we could be ready. An alert flashed across the screen. Harbinger fleet, contact in 120 seconds. Admiral Hale. And now, it's time. The Terran fleet engines roared as the ships began to move in perfect sync. Weapons hot. Shields charged. No words. No fear. Only purpose. And behind them, the fate of the galaxy. The hum of power surged through the ancient station. Every monitor, every conduit, every dormant relay now pulsed with energy. Outside, the Terran Armada awakened in full. Engines roared to life. Massive, deep burns that lit the void in sapphire and fire. Shield matrices shimmered into view, forming a protective web across hundreds of ships. Turrets rotated, missile bays opened, rail cannons locked into place. No hesitation. No delay. Only readiness. Across the command deck, a single message blinked on the central screen. Terran Armada online. Awaiting orders. Admiral Hale stood still, his hands clasped behind his back. The calm before an extinction-level storm. His voice came cold. Precise. Admiral Hale. The Senate will not survive without us. Are you here to help, or stand in our way? The silence stretched. KYX looked at Varn, then at the Admiral, then at the display. The swarm of Harbinger ships rapidly closing the distance. No one else would make it in time. No other fleet could stand against this. He stepped forward. KYX. Tell us what to do. The Admiral gave a slight nod. Not of thanks, but of acceptance. No ceremony. No oath. Only action. Outside, reality twisted. The Harbingers dropped from hyperspace. They didn't emerge, they ripped into existence. Tearing holes in the fabric of space, their black hulls glowing with red, like embers from the heart of a dying star. Vast. Silent. Beautiful in their horror. And facing them, humanity. The Terran Armada surged forward. Formations tightened. Fighters launched. Command ships locked targets. And in that moment, across the stars, a message was written not in words, but in fire and steel. Earth had returned. Not to join. Not to beg. But to remind the galaxy why their seat was always left empty. Because one day, they would come back. The Terran Armada has returned. Not as diplomats. Not as conquerors. But as something far older. And far more prepared. They didn't come to negotiate. They came with silence. With purpose. With warships older than the Senate itself. Because they knew this day would come. As the Harbingers tear through the edge of the galaxy, one question drowns out all others. What did Earth see, out there in the dark? What force was powerful enough, terrifying enough to make humanity vanish without a trace? They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They built. They hid. They waited. And now, they've moved first. Who are the Harbingers, truly? Are they invaders from another galaxy? Or are they something worse, something that was once part of us? What lies beyond the maps the Senate swore were complete? And why, after centuries of absolute silence, did Earth rise not with words, but with an armada? Let us know what you believe. Why do you think Earth left the Senate? What were they preparing for? And most of all, do you think this fleet is here to save the galaxy, or to finish what the Harbingers started? Your theory might be closer than you realize. Because Earth's seat was never empty by mistake. It was empty because Earth chose not to sit among the others. They chose to stand apart. To watch. To wait. To become something the galaxy was never meant to face alone. Now they've returned. Not to rule. But to remind the stars who they are. And this time, they will not be ignored.